And good evening to our fellow listeners and followers. Today is Sunday, September 22nd at 8:25 p.m. This is Federico Lines of States Rights Radio and
Seth Hancock of Seth Hancock Reports. In tonight's episode, we're going to talk about the law enforcement situation in America with former Illinois law enforcement police officer, my brother, Nathan Hancock. Thanks, Nate, for joining us.
Yes, no problem. Thanks for having me on.
We're going to talk about law enforcement issues in America, and if you want to talk a little bit about, I know you've been out of law enforcement for a bit now, but talk about why you initially got into law enforcement and, what you see with law enforcement today from the outside.
So I got into law enforcement because I grew up. Our uncle, Barry Cawthor, was a police officer, and I grew up really looking up to my uncle. I also believed that police work gave an opportunity to actually make a difference with citizens and also help younger people before they got caught up in the system. When I went to college, that's really why I wanted to get in police work. I really believed that there was an opportunity, again, to try to keep people out of our criminal justice system, because once they're in our system, it can be very hard to get out of the system. So that's why I initially got into it. Now, with that being said, what I've seen from the outside since I got out is that law enforcement has definitely changed quite a bit. I mean, it was starting to change when I got into it. I mean, that was, right around September 11th. And a lot of things since that time have changed quite a bit.
I see. So you've had family members that were in law enforcement, and and that's a noble profession. I mean, I've never poo-pooed or done anything to really hurt the law enforcement industry. My only concern is that I know Nathan, your job was hard. No one's disputing that. It was very exhausting and anxious and frustrating. But let me ask you a question. Did you had those type of things where your job was like that and you just want to, do something to make a difference, or you just went by the book and by the rights of your fellow citizens if they, had if they followed if they were in need to be arrested?
Okay, so going off that, I'll say I got to see quite a bit when I was younger how my Uncle Barry had made differences with people in his community and a different approach. I can also say came up in a conservative household. So, in terms of the rule of law, being a good citizen, I mean, we were brought up under that idea that we should be good citizens, but also that we had constitutional rights that deserve to be protected. I will say, me personally, I felt like I wanted to be one of those officers that wasn't just by the book, that I was actually trying to look at my job from a constitutional standpoint. Now, that can look different to a lot of different people, but I would say, like, my department that I was a part of, I felt like they did a pretty good job overall of making sure that the citizens' rights were protected. But there were officers that I will say that definitely had some issues. And a lot of times, one of the things that I noticed is that how the administration was set up in police departments. A lot of times, it set officers up to almost fail if they did not go by the book, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think to me, I believe the job of police is ultimately to make sure the peace is kept and that laws are enforced, and that people's rights are not violated. And that's why, if somebody steals, that's you've created a victim, and that person has taken the rights, property rights away from somebody. That's where the police come in and arrest the thief. But to me, I wonder how many, we just came off of, 4 years ago, COVID, and we had all these dictates coming from governors, coming from the president, things like mask mandates. I know here in the state of Illinois, there was never a law that gave Pritzker the right to put in place mask mandates, but the police followed orders. When you were in police work, how many cops do you think understood the Constitution and understood the laws, and how many police do you think would have just followed orders when the governor says you must arrest people for this, even though there's no law that grants that authority?
I would say so. I definitely see where you're coming from on this topic. That would be something I will say. When you go through, every officer that gets hired has to go through a police academy of some sort. And depending on the department, it can be anywhere from 12 weeks to 6 months. You do spend time learning the law for the state that you're in. However, I will say at the same point, you have departments across the country where you have people that can actually get hired just out of high school, or even at 21, which is a high school diploma. I'm not saying that that's not possible to still, understand your stuff and that, but I will say that in my experience, I don't think officers do really, until they've been on the longer that you're on the job, the more likely you are going to have those chances to actually see how the Constitution applies, and also deal with citizens that might be part of different organizations that really believe in constitutional rights. However, I think a lot of police officers, when they first come out of the academy and when they're first hired, I don't think a lot of them understand that. And the other thing is, once they get hired with a department too, depending on the department that they're part of, that's going to make a difference with how they interact with the citizens. There are some departments where, like I said, you're almost set up to fail if you don't go by the book. There's other departments that do actually truly, I think, believe and want to do a better job at protecting citizens' constitutional rights. I mean, but again, that's all, it depends on the department. At least from my side, what I saw and what I believe, it all depends on the department.
I see. Going back to what's, even before, during COVID, it was around the same time with COVID, where you had the issue in 2020 with George Floyd and all that. Do you believe that cops are the law enforcers, not the magistrates. And by that I mean is that, you can arrest somebody, but, you are not the law enforcement is not the executioner or the magistrate, as William Douglas said in a famous court ruling of Terry versus Ohio. My thing is that, I think from what you've said, you actually, you and several other of your coworkers do believe in the due process of the law and all that, and I commend you for that, because there's many law enforcement officials that do not. And here in South Florida, where I'm at, with Governor DeSatan, as I like to call him, they think they're above the law, and they are, they think that law enforcement is the law, and you have to respect and obey them. Yeah, I respect law enforcement, of course. But they also have to respect me. My question is that when you were in law enforcement and whenever you got a 911 call, was it always a 911 police emergency, or was it a 911 fire or medical emergency? Because where also there was issues is that, when people call for 911, they merely think it's police and not fire or medical. Did you ever have that issue, and how'd you ever dealt with that, if you ever did have that issue?
So that's a really good question. So for our department, it was you would be told when they dispatched you if it was to back up on fire and paramedic, or if it was a 911 call for the police. So if we were going to respond, if fire and paramedic needed us to come to the call, our dispatch would let us know. So we didn't have like every time that we got something over dispatch. Like I said, we didn't have that problem of. But the firefighters and paramedics were called on their own, and then if they needed us, then we would get called from our dispatcher saying, "Hey, you need to come show up at the scene."
Okay, I see. I know, Seth, you want to bring up. I know you were also discussing the form of federalization of local police departments. You ever got that, Nathan, on that, where you had too much interference on federal bureaucracy like the FBI or DEA or ATF? Did you ever have that? And what was if you find any discomfort with that type of influence and interference from federal officials?
I can definitely say, especially now, looking back, that we definitely did have federal interference a lot more than we should have. There were all kinds of programs that our department could get if they agreed to be part of like pilot programs to try different things out. The other thing was, like I said, when I became a police officer, it was right after 9/11, and so every roll call we had a part of that roll call was any things that we should be on the lookout for that the FBI had shared with departments, and like I said, definitely looking back now, we definitely had way more federal oversight over us than we should have, and definitely something that you don't really, to be honest, you don't really notice that at the time when you're an officer. You think that's just information that you need to do your job, or hey, we're going to get this new tool for for us to do our job better, as long as we meet these requirements. Like our department went through the accreditation process so that we could be an accredited police department. Well, that was really that was really something from the federal government that they were trying to incentivize police departments to do that. So definitely saw that, and like I said, looking back at it now, it definitely looks different now than it did when I was an officer at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can say on that, just a general view of local government, it's not just police, it's public works, it's schools, it's everything. Like almost everything they do is about how can I get a federal grant? And they don't even think about it. They don't think about how they lose local control every time they try and reach their hand out for that federal dollar. And that's just the mindset of all government. But my belief is that, Federico brought up George Floyd earlier, and obviously we've had some big cases where somebody has been shot and killed by police, and it gets blown up into this national story. And then you get the left comes out and says defund the police, the right comes out and says defend the police. And I'm sitting here saying localize the police. A lot of these stories, if you're not from the area, I know there's a lot of weird stuff surrounding the relationship between George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, the officer who was arrested and is now in prison there. But, I'm not from there, so I'm not following all the facts and evidence and everything. And to me, we've lost that local focus. I personally believe Derek Chauvin should be in prison, but, I didn't follow the case. I don't know all the facts. Do you think that the pressure from the national spotlight that the media put in, and, I don't know, when you were in, I don't know if there were any big cases at that time that kind of led to this big pressure from the media, but do you think cops felt that pressure, and do you think there was sufficient local control at the time you were in?
Okay, so you threw quite a bit at me right there. So I'm going to a couple of things on the George Floyd case. The George Floyd case, I really truly believe that we did not get all the information on that case, and I can also say I've looked into that quite a bit. The training that the Minneapolis Police Department went through, that was actually in their training manual. How he restrained George Floyd, but that's a different topic. But going back, I would definitely say that we've gone away from local control. And when I was a police officer, again, at the time when I was doing it, I didn't look at it quite the same as I do now. Definitely there was pressure for us to do our job a certain way. I guess for me, the case that shined a really big light back then, it was a little bit before I became a cop, was the Rodney King in L.A. That changed police work quite a bit, and I really think that case brought an even bigger oversight on the federal side of local police departments after that case. At least going back and looking at it now, and the fact I teach an intro to criminal justice class that I talk about this, and we actually talk about, a lot of people probably don't know, but the Oakland Police Department has been under federal oversight for over 20 years now, where the federal government is in charge of that police department. And they say it was because of corruption in the police department. And there have been a few times where they were, okay, if you meet this criteria, we'll remove our oversight and you'll have your department back. But every time it ends up being extended longer and longer. There's, for anybody that's interested in it, it's called The Force. It's a documentary about the Oakland Police Department and that federal oversight. Definitely we have moved more to that and less away from local jurisdictions having control, for sure.
I see. It's very interesting that Oakland gets federal oversight, but I don't believe LAPD ever got federal oversight, which
No.
federal LAPD has had more issues with violating rights than, I mean, the Oakland department. Yeah, I could see Oakland doing that, but LAPD sees more. So that's, again, Kamala Harris was part of the Oakland prosecutor's office and on that area, so maybe she wanted to get those funds when Dianne Feinstein and Barbara Boxer were senators, so I could see that she got that type of funding, but I see. Interesting that, you pointed out. Now, you also, did mention, you're right, I also grew up with the Rodney King situation, and I would, even the aftermath that came after Rodney King, was, I don't think the Minnesota or across the country was that big as the LA riots. I think the LA riots still is the largest human unrest, citizen unrest on that. I mean, there was issues going on in Minneapolis, Chicago, D.C., New York, but not as big as L.A. But that's a good point that you brought. That I think again, I think the Rodney King situation did shed a light to bring it more to the national stage. Which again, that's the problem was that L.A. was so corrupt and LAPD was so racistly corrupt that it should have been dealt with locally and not brought to the national stage. But it's a shame that it did, because it should have been more locally than national to bring that under certain scrutiny. But quite interesting.
Yeah, and on that, the idea of federal oversight, that's what bothers me the most, is that, if you go back to New York Police Department and Frank Serpico, who is that famous whistleblower about police corruption, and he eventually got shot because he wasn't willing to take part in the corruption. But one of the things that he said at the time was that, the police are like every other industry out there. It's made up of people, and people are imperfect. So there's always going to be rooms for improvement. There's always going to be corruption that needs to be weeded out, regardless if it's police, if it's businesses, if it's, public works departments. But the question is, the mark of a good police department is their ability to weed out corruption and to deal with problems. And that's why my focus is on localizing police. I think when we have this federal Leviathan that's controlling everything, it's basically impossible to weed out corruption. And when you were a cop, I think cops make mistakes, and it's honest mistakes. There are also corrupt cops who are just trying to make side deals and make money off of it. But did you feel like the police that you worked with, that, if there were mistakes made, were you able to correct them And, I know it's a little different. I think the most corrupt departments are large cities, and you weren't in a large city police department. But what did you think about the ability to make improvements, when, there were problems, when there were mistakes? Do you think that officers were receptive to it, or were they defensive about trying to make improvements?
So I would say, again, it would depend on the officers that were involved in it. I will say that our department was actually went above and beyond when it came to extra training. I know other departments did not go through as many training sessions as our chief liked to at that time. But I will also say, too, it went back to how long an officer had been on the department. Really made a difference with how open or receptive they were to having their mistakes pointed out and fixed. I truly believe when I was hired that they wanted, if there was a mistake, they wanted to help. Like, I remember going through the field training. I believe that the officers that were part of that wanted to make sure that the new officers were trained the best possible to make sure that they understood what rights citizens had. But again, I really think it went down to how long an officer, how many, I hate to say it too, but how many times did they have complaints filed against them by citizens? What was the record? Had they been on the department longer than a year? Because after a year, most police departments, I won't say all, but most, after a year, you're pretty protected after that year. Now, I felt like our department tried to make sure that we corrected mistakes, but again, I don't think we did a perfect job at that.
I see. I see your point. Let me see what's in it. But to going back to federalization of police, did you see that in your local law enforcement? And did the FBI or whatever federal agency, did they treat you with respect, or it's like they imposed their authority on your law enforcement area? What was that? Because I've seen Narcos, the Netflix series on the DEA and other ATF, where they really imposed their authority on local law enforcement. How did they did they treat your local law enforcement area with respect, or they imposed their authority and you had to say whatever they went by? I'm just curious.
I would say. They definitely, your department was expected to, like I said, our roll calls every day that we had before we went out on our shift dealt with any bulletins that came across from the FBI, DEA, Homeland Security, that stuff, and you were expected to, okay, you should be looking out for that. Now, do I think, did they respect local law enforcement? Sometimes. I think now, what I've seen now, and what I've seen in articles that I've read, and that I think that they've gone way above that. Like, they are definitely putting pressure on local police departments to follow their mandates, and if you don't, you lose federal funding.
I see. Yeah, that's one thing that I've seen it more here in South Florida, where I think Seth and I did a podcast where the city of Coral Gables, where I'm at. It looks like they really do accept federal funding, and not only here in Coral Gables, but also in Lee County, Florida, near Cape Coral, Florida, on the eastern side. And there's one in Polk County. They do share federal government co-op teams and efforts, like to go after sex trafficking and all that, and drug enforcement. So for some reason here in South Florida, they want to team up with federal government officials because they want that federal government funding. Is Illinois was always in your law enforcement jurisdiction, or any other law enforcement in Illinois was always keen to accept that federal funding to show their cooperation?
From my experience, yes. They wanted that federal funding because that was really the way that they could get more, as they looked at it, get more tools for their police officers. Mm-hmm. Now, do I think it's gotten a lot worse from that point to now? I think that's gone way above that now. I just see it more and more where our federal government is getting involved. I mean, we just had recently here. Now I'm in Omaha, Nebraska, and we just had individual. It hasn't really made the national news, which I was a little surprised about, but it had to do with a no-knock warrant that was served, and individual was actually killed by an officer executing no-knock warrant. Well, if you actually look into this case at all, the DEA was involved, and that's why this no-knock warrant took place. I really believe that the Omaha Police Department was sort of pressured into that, into this case. Like I said, it hasn't quite gotten the national news that I thought it might, but it just happened with September 13th. So.
I see. Yeah, I know that. I don't know if Breonna Taylor, that in Kentucky, I forgot what year was that. They also had like a no-knock warrant, and I don't know if they had any influence with the federal government. But yet again, when you have influence from the federal government, you have a lot of chaos and disorder, because local police don't do their homework, they don't do their work because they want to get it done. And just a side story with the Unabomber that I also grew up with, that story with Ted Kaczynski. The way they brought him down, I mean, Ted Kaczynski was a horrible person. He's now dead, but he was a horrible person, what he did. But the way that they obtained the warrant with a foreign linguistics excuse to get that warrant, that was very shameful of the FBI to do that. I mean, if you want to get the guy on the facts, not on something that has no legal precedent. So that really has, this no-knock warrant has established a precedent, and as well back since 1964, where law enforcement has created this, sense of entitlement. And I'm not saying you, Nathan, but just the overall of a small minority of law enforcement officials, where they think they're entitled above the law, and you have to respect it no matter what. Here in South Florida, they have that sense of mentality, and unfortunately, the majority of here law enforcement are mainly Hispanic individuals, and they've come from a former country that has that sense of totalitarianism that they want to impose that here. They want to impose that law and order with, strict things. And me being a naturalized American citizen coming from that type of nation, I really don't want that. I want them, to respect my rights as well as I have to respect their rights. So, in speaking to you, Nathan, I see that you are a man of true constitutional convictions, and I applaud for your service, that you want to keep that and you want to do good for the community in the constitutional way, and that's what many people should do that, and to spread the message of constitutionalism and respect. I've always said I will back the blue if you back my rights. And vice versa. So, but I commend you for that service, Nathan, because we need more people like you that understand our rights and want to enforce the law and order, but with the tools that is in the Constitution and our rights.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and bringing up the no-knock warrant and brings up another issue, because the first time I ever saw a no-knock warrant was many years ago. It was John Stossel did an episode on police, and it was a case out of Colorado where the police got a tip from a low-level drug crime individual, and they went and got a no-knock warrant from a judge, and they busted down the wrong door, ended up killing the wrong guy. They ended up knocking down the wrong door, killing the guy in the apartment. And the thing that stuck out to me was there was no police work done. They just got a tip from somebody and immediately went and got a no-knock warrant from a judge. They didn't do any investigation. They didn't stake out the apartment, see if they could collect evidence to go and eventually get a warrant. The judge just gave the warrant off of a tip from a criminal. And I see, and it's not just that, but I see other things coming out today. I just saw a headline that police are now using Chat GPT to write up reports from AI-powered body cameras. And it seems like with the technology that's coming up, it's going to give more excuses for police not to actually do their job. Do you think that... do you think that police, from what you see today, and what you saw during your time as a cop, do you think that there were police that just didn't do their job? Do you see that today? Do you think that police are incentivized to take the easy route? I will say that I definitely could see where a lot of people, yes, they do want to, whatever is going to be the easiest to keep them from not having to answer to their supervisor, to making the whole process be easier. I do see that happening more. I also think that it has to do a lot with how they're being trained and what they're being expected. I mean, what they're being expected to do. I think, honestly, right now, I think there's a lot of police officers, not that this is a bad thing, but I think a lot of officers are scared to do their job the way that they're supposed to do their job, just because of how everything is now. And coming from pressures from their supervisors, which their supervisors are being pressured from their own. And then, they also get pressure from the state and federal government to do it certain ways. Off of what you were talking about, that they're using Chat GPT, I saw there's
apparently a new app that some officers are using. It's called Fog, and they basically can follow an individual's activities, basically follow their activities, whatever they're doing, without any warrant. And I just got that in my email yesterday about this. I haven't looked enough into it yet to see my thoughts, but the first thing that came to my mind when I saw that was that it's almost like a lot of us citizens have given up the idea of having privacy for the thoughts that, well, if we give up a little bit of our privacy rights, it's going to mean that we're more secure. And I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Well, we've given up a lot more than just a little bit of our privacy over the years, but that's, go way back earlier, you mentioned that you got into law enforcement shortly after 9/11, and that's when, really the NSA spying and wiretapping really took off. That's Fourth Amendment is probably the most important amendment we can talk about when talking about law enforcement and making sure that our Fourth Amendment rights are protected. Just from your experience, how did you deal with Fourth Amendment issues when you were a cop? How did your colleagues do it? And what do you think are the appropriate ways police should, do police need to be constantly trained to recognize the Fourth Amendment right? What's some of the ways you think that police departments could better protect Fourth Amendment rights and make sure that it's in their policies? What type of practices or professional development do you think would help make sure Fourth Amendment issues are followed in a police department?
That question has a lot. I truly believe that most people that get into law enforcement that want to be police officers go in with the right intent. When they're going through the whole hiring process, it can take a long time to get hired by a police department. If you're going that route, I truly believe most, I'm not saying all, most go in there with the right intent. But the problem is that I don't think there's enough training. And I won't just say the Fourth Amendment, but that's what we're talking about. I don't think there's enough training on the constitutional rights of citizens when they're actually dealing with law enforcement. I actually think, and this isn't just police officers, I think citizens in general don't understand that they have legal protections granted by the Constitution when they are stopped by the police. And that goes to a bigger, a way bigger issue than just the police officers. I would say that I would definitely, you said, should there be ongoing training? And my answer to that would be yes. I really think that that's something that I would be for it on a biannual basis, that police departments would put their officers through constitutional training. And also case law changes quite a bit. And there's a lot of things that are up for interpretation and are, the courts come down and say, well, this is how we saw it. That's what the courts, their job is to do, is to interpret what the legislative body's intent was when they pass something. So there's constantly cases that come through our Supreme Court every year that have an impact on law enforcement. And so I do think that is something that police departments should be doing, is providing ongoing training for their officers. And the other thing too is, if you don't constantly have that training, at some point you're going to forget. Not that you're going to completely forget it, but you're not going to be as sharp if you're not constantly having to go through that training. And so I think that would be a great way to actually start changing some of the issues, is having officers go through training that's, a consistent training schedule. I think that would help. Is it going to fix all the problems? No. The other thing is, I'm sorry, but we have to do a better job on the education side, which that's where I'm at now as a teacher, is making sure that our youth come through understanding that they do have protections when they have interactions with law enforcement at whatever level.
Yes, no, you're right. As Seth was pointing out, myself was pointing out, that we need to educate the public because sadly, the public, as well as some law enforcement, are not aware of our constitutional rights. Not only the Fourth Amendment, which is a very serious right that we have to maintain, but the Third Amendment as well, where cops have set lodging or a presence in somebody's home without the proper without the proper documentation. So, but that's something that we've always and I'm glad that you're a teacher and you're teaching that to your students, so they are aware what their rights are. And cops don't have rights. We have the rights, so that's very good. We've almost a few more moments out of time. Nathan, do you have anything you want us to add on your experience and what you have shown to alert the public on this? I know you said it, but any last thoughts on your former law enforcement experience and what you're doing now?
The biggest thing that I would say to that, or that I would want to leave with, is again, going back to the idea that we have to do a better job of educating the public overall. And also, the other thing that I will point out too is that I hope most people and people listening to the show can take away that people that want to go into that field, like I said before, I truly believe they go in with the right intent. They go in there with the purpose of trying to help and make a difference, and then it's over time they sort of get beaten up by the system, more or less, and that's when we see, when they're having to go through a lot of extra hoops in that, which they should be. But I think that a lot go into that. Most go into it with the intent to help. But we definitely need to do something better to help our law enforcement when they do become police officers, to consistently go through more training and understand that citizen has the same. The police officer that's stopping a citizen doesn't have any more rights than the citizen that was stopped, and that's the thing. I think that gets lost a lot. Is I just don't think we've had enough training, and I don't think there hasn't been a push for that, and hopefully we can get that. The best thing you can do is actually talk about that and have those conversations and push it. Even having the conversations with your local police department about, hey, what are you providing for your local, for your police officers? What kind of training are they getting that deals with their citizens' rights. And that's something that any one of us can go have that conversation and should have that conversation. So that's what I would want to leave on.
All right, that's very interesting. The different training, all that. We'll touch base on that on another program. I would like to have you back, discuss with law enforcement and immigration. But we're almost out of time. Seth, any last thoughts on law enforcement and your rights?
Yeah, I'll say this. Here's a very important right that citizens should remember is that Fifth Amendment right. Don't talk to cops. No offense.
Yeah, you don't have to. You don't have to. You get stopped by the police, providing your license and registration and nothing else. I mean, that's why police officers always, when they come up to your window on a traffic stop, do you know why I stopped you? Your best that's not wrong. Just don't say anything.
Yeah, let him explain what the issue is, and you'll say, okay, well then do your next. But you're right. Yeah, don't talk to cops unless you're not. You don't want to incriminate yourself. And you're right. That's the third, the fourth, and the fifth are the most important amendments to your individual freedom and your individual rights. So as I said, don't talk to cops and just keep low down. But education is the key. And I'm glad that you're educating your kids and people in Omaha, Nebraska on that. And let's hope we find more law enforcement individuals like yourself that will obey that. And I like I said before, I commend you on that truthfulness, and I appreciate that. With that note, Nathan, it's been a pleasure. We would love to have you again to discuss more about law enforcement and particularly on the immigration issue. So let Seth know when you can come back, and we'd love to have you.
That sounds good. Would love to do it again.
Perfect. All right, then with that note, have yourself a wonderful week ahead, and we'll be back either Sunday or Monday, pertaining to our schedule, and have a great night.
Good night.
Good night.